I used to believe a man and a woman could have a purely professional relationship, until I caught my husband in a luxury hotel room with his work wife. I used to. At least I thought I did, until I started noticing the way my husband Eric talked about his work wife, Samantha. My husband Eric was the kind of man people admired, successful, charming, respected in his field. He had been with his company for almost a decade, moving up the corporate ladder effortlessly. Whenever we attended office events together, his colleagues would always joke about how lucky I was to have a husband like him. I believed that too. And then there was Samantha. She was his closest female colleague, the kind of woman who always found a way to be in every conversation, every meeting, every work dinner. She had been in his life for years, long before I ever suspected anything. She wasn't just a coworker, she was his work wife. At first I didn't think much of it. Married people have friends, right? But she knew too much. She knew how Eric liked his coffee, what shows he watched. Inside jokes that made me feel like an outsider. At every company gathering, she would talk about him like she was the one married to him, sometimes even finishing his sentences. But the worst part, she always knew things about our marriage before I even said a word. It started subtly. One evening, at a company dinner, a colleague jokingly asked when Eric and I were finally taking that big anniversary trip we'd been planning. I hadn't told anyone about it yet. Before I could answer, Samantha smirked and said, "Oh, you mean the Paris trip?" "Yeah. Eric mentioned he wasn't sure if the timing would work out." I froze. I had just suggested that trip to Eric the night before. He had brushed me off, saying he'd think about it, and yet, somehow, Samantha already knew about our conversation. I turned to Eric, expecting him to at least look surprised, but he just chuckled awkwardly and took a sip of his drink, avoiding my gaze. "And Samantha?" She looked right at me, her lips curled in the faintest smile, like she knew something I didn't. After that night, I started paying closer attention. Eric's phone, once casually left on the counter, was now always in his pocket, always face down. When I walked into the room, he would quickly swipe away from whatever was on his screen. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then, Samantha's behavior became even bolder. She started commenting on things she had no business knowing. One night, Eric told me he had an important client dinner, but an hour later, Samantha posted an Instagram story, dining at a fancy restaurant, 2 glasses of wine on the table, no tags, no faces. But I recognized the watch on the wrist resting next to hers. It was Eric's. I waited until he got home. He walked in looking relaxed, almost too comfortable. "How was work?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. Eric loosened his tie, yawning. "Exhausting. Barely left my desk all night." I stared at him. He didn't even hesitate. That was the moment I knew. Something was wrong. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed Eric's lie over and over again. The way Samantha always seemed to know things she shouldn't. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking, that maybe there was an explanation. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And I needed proof. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone from the nightstand, pretending to check the time. The moment he stepped out of the bathroom, his entire body tensed. "Why do you have my phone?" I turned the screen toward him, just checking the time. He snatched it from my hand. "You have a clock on your side of the bed." Then he shoved his phone into his pocket and walked out of the room. He was hiding something. Later that day, I did something I'd never done before. I went to his office unannounced. I told myself it was just a spontaneous visit, a sweet gesture, but deep down, I wanted to see them together. When I arrived, his assistant told me he was in a meeting with Samantha. Of course. I made my way toward the conference rooms, my heart pounding. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe just them sitting across from each other going over some boring spreadsheets. But as I got closer, I heard laughter. Then her voice. "Oh, come on, Eric. You can't pretend like last night wasn't fun." My breath caught in my throat. Eric chuckled. "You're ridiculous!" Samantha giggled. "I'm serious. I can't believe you still went home after that." I gripped my bag tighter. What exactly had happened last night? And then, before I could stop myself, I pushed the door open. They both turned toward me at the same time. Eric's face went pale. "Samantha?" She smiled, like she had been expecting me. "Hey, you," she said smoothly, crossing her arms. "Didn't know you were stopping by." Eric cleared his throat. "Babe, What are you doing here? I forced a smile. Just thought I'd surprise you. Samantha's eyes gleamed with amusement. How sweet. Eric stood up, moving toward me like he could somehow block whatever tension was filling the room. I was just about to call you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? About what? He hesitated. Lunch. Samantha laughed. Right. Lunch. Eric shot her a look, but she just shrugged like she was enjoying this. I turned to her. You two seem awfully close. She tilted her head. Well, when you work together as much as we do... She let the sentence hang in the air. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't going to let her play these mind games with me. I turned back to Eric. Can we talk? Alone? Samantha rolled her eyes. Oh, please, I was just leaving. She grabbed her phone and brushed past me on her way out, but not before leaning in just enough to whisper something under her breath. You're a little late, sweetheart. I stiffened. My blood turned cold. I spun around to face her, but she was already walking down the hall, her heels clicking against the floor. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I turned back to Eric, who was now rubbing his temples like he had a headache. Look, he sighed. I know how this looks, but... I held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. Ever since that day at Eric's office, something had been gnawing at me. It wasn't just the way Samantha smirked at me, or the cryptic words she whispered. It was how Eric had changed. He had become more careful, more distant. His phone never left his side. At night, he would turn it face down on the nightstand, and whenever it buzzed, he'd make sure to check it away from my view. He thought he was being discreet, but he was only confirming my suspicions. The excuses started piling up. Late meetings. Зрение непредвиденные рабочие события. Зрение tight deadlines. And each time, the pattern was the same. He would leave at odd hours, always shower before bed, and refuse to answer my calls while he was out. That night, when he casually said, Don't wait up, I have to stay late at work again, I simply smiled. I didn't argue, I didn't accuse. I just grabbed my car keys and followed him. I kept a safe distance, trailing Eric's car through the city. I had expected him to head toward his office, but my stomach twisted when he drove past it, then past the business district, then past every reasonable place a late-night work event could be held. Finally, he pulled into the parking lot of a luxury hotel. I gritted my teeth as I parked a few spots away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My chest tightened when I saw him check his phone, then step out of the car, glancing around as if making sure he hadn't been followed. Seconds later, Samantha arrived. She wasn't dressed for work. Her tight black dress, perfectly styled hair, and red lipstick weren't for a business meeting. I pulled out my phone, snapping photos as she walked straight up to Eric. They didn't touch. Not yet. But the way Samantha smiled and the way Eric leaned in to whisper something before they walked inside together, it was all I needed to know. I had them. I couldn't just rely on photos of them walking in together. I needed undeniable proof. I entered the hotel minutes later, keeping my head down as I walked past the front desk. I needed to know their room number, but hotels didn't just give that kind of information out. I glanced at the digital board listing the hotel's services. Then an idea clicked in my head. I approached the reception desk with a polite smile. Hi, I think my husband might have checked in under a work reservation, but I forgot the room number. It should be under Eric Daniels. The receptionist frowned. I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't disclose guest information. I sighed dramatically. Of course. It's just that it's our anniversary, and I wanted to surprise him with a gift. He's been working so hard lately. I trailed off, lowering my eyes as if I were on the verge of tears. That did it? She hesitated, then checked her screen. Mr. Daniels is in room 702. I forced myself not to react. Thank you so much. Could you also send up a bottle of wine to the room? She nodded, placing the order. I turned and walked toward the elevators, my heart hammering. I lingered in the hallway for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I had the room number. I had my phone ready. Now, I just needed a way inside. Just as I was debating my next move, I noticed a housekeeping cart parked outside another room. An idea struck me. I waited until a staff member passed by, then picked up the bottle of wine from the cart and walked confidently toward room 702. With steady hands, I knocked. Seconds later, the door opened. Eric stood there. His shirt was unbuttoned, his hair slightly tousled. His eyes widened in shock the moment he saw me. Behind him, Samantha was lounging on the bed, swirling a glass of wine in her hand, smirking. Time seemed to freeze. "Well," Samantha said smoothly, "didn't expect room service to be this exciting." Eric's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He had no excuse. I lifted my phone and snapped a picture. Finally, Eric stammered, "You're overreacting." "Do you really think I'd risk everything for her?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, so you're just casually half-dressed in a hotel room with your coworker? That's a normal business protocol?" Samantha sighed, stretching lazily. "Oh, honey, you should really focus on keeping your husband instead of embarrassing yourself in public." I glared at her. "Shut up!" For the first time, her smirk faltered. Eric reached for me, desperation creeping into his voice. "Babe, please!" I stepped back. "Don't!" My voice was cold. "I have all the proof I need." I forced myself to move, but my legs felt like lead. Every step away from that door felt like walking through quicksand, drowning in the weight of betrayal. But something still didn't feel right. I stepped into the elevator, my hands still shaking as I scrolled through the photos I had taken. This was it. The proof of Eric's betrayal. I should have felt victorious. But then, as I walked into the lobby, something caught my eye. A black luxury car had just pulled up outside. A man stepped out. He was tall, sharply dressed, and exuded confidence. But more than that, he looked like he was waiting for someone. I slowed my steps, pretending to check my phone. The man glanced at his watch, then at the entrance. A few minutes later, Samantha walked out. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't in a hurry. She looked completely composed. And then, she walked straight to him. I held my breath. What was happening? He smirked as she approached, his posture relaxed, expectant, and then she kissed him. Right there, in the middle of the hotel parking lot. My grip on my phone tightened. What the hell? My mind raced. Samantha had just spent the last hour in a hotel room with my husband, and yet here she was, acting like that meant absolutely nothing. She wasn't sneaking around. She wasn't nervous. Because Eric wasn't the man she was actually with. This man was. I watched as she laughed, placing a hand on his chest, whispering something in his ear. He grinned, wrapping an arm around her waist. This wasn't just an affair. This was a game. And Eric? He was just another pawn. I wanted to march up to them, expose her, tell this man exactly what kind of woman she was. But I stopped myself. Number not yet. If Samantha thought she had fooled everyone, if she thought Eric was just another disposable piece in her game, then she was about to learn a very painful lesson. I wasn't just going to expose my cheating husband. I was going to expose her. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing with everything I had just witnessed. Catching Eric and Samantha in that hotel room should have been enough. But now I knew the truth ran deeper. Samantha wasn't just having an affair. She was playing Eric. And the most shocking part? He wasn't even the man she was really with. That changed everything. At first I didn't understand. Why would she keep Eric around if she had someone else? Someone who clearly held more wealth and power. What was she gaining from this? Then the realization hit me. Eric wasn't the prize. He was the insurance policy. Samantha was smart, calculated. If things ever fell apart with Jonathan, she needed someone to fall back on. And Eric, the naive idiot, had willingly stepped into that role without even realizing it. I could have confronted Eric that night, thrown the evidence in his face, and walked away. But that would have been too easy. Samantha had spent all this time playing a game, manipulating people into thinking she was untouchable. Now, it was my turn. I spent the next few days carefully gathering every piece of evidence I needed. I started with the photos and videos from the hotel, the undeniable proofs of Samantha sneaking into a room with Eric, only to leave with someone else. But I needed more. So I dug deeper. Eric's phone had become his most guarded possession, but he wasn't the only one careless enough to leave breadcrumbs. Samantha was too. I scoured her social media, every tagged post, every comment. I compared timestamps, checked locations, pieced together every small inconsistency. A dinner she claimed was with colleagues, but was actually a weekend trip. A business meeting that coincided with the night she spent at the hotel. And then the jackpot. A private event invitation. A corporate gala that both Eric and Jonathan would be attending. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. The perfect moment to tear down Samantha's empire of lies. The night of the event, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that exuded confidence and control. I wasn't here to create a scene. I was here to expose one. I arrived early, blending into the crowd. The room was grand, filled with powerful executives, investors, and high-ranking officials. Eric was already there, charming his way through conversations, completely unaware of what was coming. Then I saw her. Samantha was draped in a stunning red dress, every movement calculated, every smile practiced. She worked the room with ease, seamlessly transitioning from one conversation to the next. She looked untouchable, until Jonathan arrived. The moment she saw him, her entire demeanor shifted. The fake charm melted away, replaced by something real. She smoothed her dress, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and her smile. It wasn't forced. For the first time, I saw the Samantha that Eric had never seen, the one who actually cared, which meant she had no idea what was coming. I made my move. I approached Jonathan first, making sure Samantha wasn't watching. "Jonathan Pierce, right?" I said, my voice smooth, confident. He turned to me, offering a polite but curious smile. "Yes, and you are?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit play. The video of Samantha and Eric walking into the hotel together. Jonathan's entire posture stiffened. His smile faded, his jaw tightening as he absorbed what he was seeing. His grip on his glass tightened. Then, just as planned, I stepped away. Because at that exact moment, Samantha turned and saw Jonathan watching the video. I watched it unfold like a perfectly choreographed performance. Jonathan's face was unreadable, his gaze locked onto the screen. Samantha's confident stride slowed, then stopped. Her breath hitched as she saw what he was seeing. And then, Eric followed his line of sight. I saw the confusion on his face first. Then the slow, creeping realization. His eyes darted from Samantha to Jonathan to the video playing in Jonathan's hands. Everything clicked. The room had gone silent around them. Samantha's lips parted, her expression flickering between shock and calculation. She was scrambling. For the first time, she was trying to find a way out. Jonathan was the first to speak. His voice was cold, dangerous. "Tell me this isn't real." Samantha took a step forward. "Jonathan, I can explain." He cut her off. "Explain what? That you were screwing another man while coming home to me?" Eric let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "So that's why you kept telling me to be patient? Because you were playing us both?" Samantha turned to him, desperate. "Eric, But he stepped back. His face was red, humiliated. "Jesus Christ, I was just your backup plan, wasn't I?" Her eyes darted between them, panic setting in. For the first time, Samantha was out of moves. And Jonathan? He didn't even look angry anymore, just disgusted. He let out a slow breath and muttered, "Pathetic." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Eric stood there for a moment, watching Jonathan leave, before finally turning to Samantha one last time. His expression was pure betrayal. Then he walked away too. And just like that, Samantha was completely, utterly alone. I didn't stay to watch her crumble. I didn't need to. The damage had already been done. As I walked out of the venue, I took one last glance at Eric. He was standing near the entrance, staring blankly at the ground, still processing everything. I should have felt bad for him, but I didn't. He had chosen to betray me. He had chosen to lie. And now, he had to live with the consequences. Stepping outside, I finally let out the breath I had been holding. The cold night air hit my skin, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. But in the end, she was the one left with nothing, and I was the one who walked away victorious. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My phone was flooded with messages, friends, coworkers, even distant acquaintances who had caught wind of what happened at the gala. Samantha's carefully curated image had crumbled overnight. Eric tried to reach out. His messages were a mix of regret and pathetic attempts to justify his actions. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Samantha, on the other hand, had gone silent. The last I heard, Jonathan had cut ties with her completely, and she had become a cautionary tale in our social circles. The woman who thought she could control everything, only to end up with nothing. As for me, I was free. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a control over my own life again. Not weighed down by suspicion, not second-guessing every word, every action. I learned something important through all of this. Betrayal isn't always about the act itself. It's about the deception, the way people rewrite history to justify their wrongs. People like Eric and Samantha will always exist, those who take, manipulate, and leave destruction in their wake. But the truth is, you can't control how others treat you. You can only control how you respond. I could have let this break me. I could have let bitterness consume me, let their actions define my self-worth. But instead, I chose something better. I chose to walk away with my dignity, with my strength, with my head held high, because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's letting them destroy themselves.